Halloween 2018, set 40 years after Michael Myers' infamous return to Haddonfield, is a brilliant comeback for the spooky franchise, bringing all the best bits back to life and skimping on the problems of sequels past. But as much as it's a homage to and improvement on Halloween's gone by, this is a whole new breed for the slasher franchise, and for Michael Myers too in the process. In this iteration, Myers doesn't stalk, he doesn't stare, and he doesn't pause. Three elements that make John Carpenter's original Halloween so suspenseful. Instead, he moves along at a terrifying pace, ghosting from house to house like a literal boogeyman who, in 2018, doesn't have the time to indulge in his own voyeuristic tendencies. For fans of the original Halloween, such a change may even make the character of Michael less terrifying, less unique, and perhaps even less interesting. But there's a genuinely unnerving reason for this change in Michael's MO, and one that makes the latest Halloween every bit the bone-chilling watch it was originally touted to be. So lock your doors and bolt up your basement, as I'm Ash from That Film Theory, and this is why Halloween 2018 is scarier than you think. In order to understand Michael as he is today, we must first understand the character as he was 40 years ago, an institutionalized 20-something who returned to the town of his birth to relive his most impactful childhood memory. Now, there are plenty of reasons for why Michael Myers is the horror genre's most terrifying figure. The fact he just kills because he wants to rather than for any given reason, his specific style of movement, and of course, his headgear. But one of the biggest reasons stems from the fact his horrifying journey all began at the tender age of 6 with the death of Judith. The murder of Judith Myers is so unnerving because it comes from the most sterile image of America that can actually be conjured in any way. A young child raised in a suburban town in the middle of the country, dressing up for a cherished holiday. Carpenter himself conceived of Halloween's story by drawing from the idea that every town has its secret, that there's always a house down the lane that somebody was killed in or that somebody went crazy in. And that's what makes it such an effective piece of cinema. Haddonfield, in essence, could be anyone's town. All that's missing is a freshly baked pie cooling on an open windowsill. But there's another side of the coin with Halloween, and it lies in the genesis of Michael Myers. According to Carpenter, the idea for the character came from a visit he'd undertaken to a Kentucky institution, where he witnessed a young boy with a blank, expressionless stare. This would later inform Dr. Loomis's iconic description of the character during the second half of the original film, although there's something just as important that should be noted. Myers is institutionalized at a young age, and when he breaks out, he retains an almost childlike persona. It's like he's reliving the original event that defined him at 6 years old, again, the murder of his sister. The first thing on his agenda once he breaks out is to break into a Halloween store and steal a mask, dressing up in the same way he did on that first fateful Halloween night before he travels to the home of his parents. He literally retraces his steps and then cruelly, methodically, stalks the first person he happens upon. The voyeurism is the very same that haunted Judith Myers throughout the opening of the 1978 movie. He toys with his victims in a ruthless game of hide and seek, just as he did with his sister, because it's all he knows and all he's been waiting for. It's also the chief reason for why Halloween is so terrifying, and though it may not seem that way at first, it too informs the new sequel in a pretty significant way. Once Michael arrives in Haddonfield, he starts killing instantly rather than stalking about. It's almost second nature, and though it could be argued that the film loses a key component of Michael's horror in not having him observe the victims in the way he used to, the shift in approach actually begets a terrifying revelation. It appears in this movie as though the murder of Judith Myers no longer takes primacy in Michael's memories. It isn't the driving force that informs him what exactly to do. Whereas before he was acting on an instinct defined in his childhood, now he's reliving the memory of a new event instead. That being the attempted murder of Laurie Strode in 1978. And we can see this in the way he interacts with Oscar, the creepy friend from the party. Oscar, in a drunken stupor and believing that Michael is actually just an upset neighbour, asks him one question. Have you ever known one girl you couldn't have? This is a pretty blatant reference to Laurie, the sole survivor of the 1978 murders, and though this is about as close to motive as we can ascribe to Michael's return, all his victims, bar perhaps the journalists in possession of his ghostly mask, are also victims of happenstance, just as Laurie and her friends were 40 years earlier. Michael's no longer reliving a childhood memory, but instead the murders of 1978. The senseless nature of his violence is exemplified through that opening tracking shot where he moves from building to building, and the lack of pause, whether to stalk or observe, is thoroughly disquieting. He's on autopilot for bashing people's heads in, as it's the last thing he freely got to do 40 years ago. It's overwritten the memory of murdering Judith. He now acts out in this way from 1978 instead. There's a striking moment that occurs midway through the new Halloween, where Michael first arrives in Haddonfield. He walks along the street until he bumps into a couple of trick-or-treaters and then slowly turns a corner. He finds a hammer, enters the closest home to him, and brutally murders the only adult occupant inside. Immediately after, he picks up a kitchen knife resting on a table and moves on to the house next door, repeating the process as a young woman begins to settle down for the evening. First of all, there are many similarities between this sequence and the opening shot in the Carpenter movie. It's all accomplished in one take, there are 2 moments where perspective switches to the killer's point of view, and it even mirrors certain sound effects from the original film. It's a textbook homage to Carpenter and Hill's classic, but it also illustrates how cold, brutal, and ruthless Myers is. He's practiced this and is well versed in his murdering ways now, taking direct inspiration from his 1978 murder spree rather than the unknowing, uncertain murder of Judith Myers that originally drove him. In short, his evolution of character from slow stalker to flippant murderer is his reliving of the original movie. And that's how Halloween 2018 is scarier than you think. There's hidden purpose and motive behind Michael Myers' actions that aren't always apparent when he's on screen. If we read a little closer into what he's doing and how he's playing it out, then there's all sorts of things that bubble up under the William Shatner mask. What do you think of this theory, and how terrifying is Michael Myers in his Halloween return? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. I've been Ash, and this has been That Film Theory. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and keep coming back for more. Thanks for watching!